I think we should move on to a bit of news. How would you like to do a bit of news? Well, okay, it's news and it's also opinion. Let's be honest, it's news and it's opinion.
We wear our politics in our sleeves here, so we have opinions about all of this.
Yeah.
You may have heard that there are some protests happening around the world at the moment.
Big time.
To do with Black Lives Matter. And of course, questions of race have been popping up in the gaming world as well. And so we've got a few different things here to talk about. Firstly, Magic the Gathering has officially banned a small number of cards from every single format and removed their images from Gatherer, which is the Magic search engine, and replaced them all with an
official statement.
An official statement.
Do you want me to read it? I will read.
Why don't you read the official statement, Claire?
So this is the official statement on invoke prejudice. And instead of having a card image, it says, "We have removed this card image from our database because it has racist or culturally offensive art, text, or a combination thereof. Racism and cultural insensitivity are unacceptable and have no place in our games, nor anywhere." Well done, Magic.
So there's about 6 or so cards.
I'll read out the cards. It's Invoke Prejudice, Cleanse, which is a white ability that cleanses out black creatures.
Yes.
Stone Throwing Devils, Pradish Gypsies, Jihad, Imprison, and Crusade, another white card. I just want to say at the top, my basic instinctual reaction to this is, oh good.
I agree. The 90s, when I think all of these cards were from the 90s. A lot of these cards are very old cards.
Yeah.
And a lot of these cards came out when basically no one knew any better.
Yeah, if you sort of go back to some of the comedy and children's cartoons that I grew up with and you grew up with, if you look back now, it's a bit yikes. It's a wee bit yikes.
I'm thinking here about the Pradish Gypsies. We didn't really consider how gypsy is an offensive term. My initial reaction to this as well was, good. Maybe we should acknowledge that we made some mistakes and we're going to do something about them.
But then my second reaction was a bit more nuanced.
My second reaction was, so what?
Yeah?
All of these cards are, as I've said, about 20 years old. To the best of my knowledge, only one of them has been reprinted.
Crusade, right?
Crusade in living memory, practically.
Yeah.
And a lot of the other cards...
Oh, let's be specific about what Crusade is. Crusade is actually... The reason why it was reprinted was because mechanically it is a good card for a white deck to have.
There are updated versions of it now which are better, but...
Yeah, which is good, because...
Crusade used to be a staple card for a white colour deck, and there were equivalent cards for the other colours where it made all the creatures of that colour better.
Yeah, so this one said, make all white creatures have +1/+1.
Which is a little unfortunate.
Yeah.
To say the least. Anyway.
But now they've replaced that since there has been better cards that do pretty much the same thing.
Similar things.
Yeah.
But I don't think anybody would have been thinking about Pradish Gypsies for the last 20 years.
Yeah, no one
when it came out, it was a bad card.
It's just like that meme, that meme where it's like, nobody, silence, me, making a fuss about something nobody really cared about. That was my sort of reaction. And for me, it was sort of like, oh yeah, here we go again. It's a brand performing wokeness. I get a little bit, often my reaction to corporations doing things like this is like, 1, that's really cringy. 2, what have you actually done to better the cause of oppressed peoples?
Now, Wizards has done some things which have, to my mind, actually helped the cause of oppressed people.
Okay. Go on.
Things like, well, we'll talk about gender another time maybe, but
that
creating characters like
Alicia
in the Khans of Tarkir block, who is a trans character.
Right.
Having more prominent characters of colour, like Teferi, the Planeswalker, who's the face of the latest Magic set, which is coming out very soon. We're excited to play with.
Oh, protagonizing and desexifying. It's a sort of wrong word. Pin-upifying Liliana.
Yes, Liliana, the Planeswalker, her early art is very male gaze.
Yeah.
And her later art...
She's still sexy.
She's still sexy.
But it's on her own terms, sort of
Yes.
thing. Yeah, it's far more... She looks like a work of art rather than semi-pornographic. But anyway, back
these
to...
sorts of actions where they make actual progress. Another one is the character of Kaya, who Magic hired a black creator to create the character and to consult with her and to make her authentically black. That felt like a good step. Banning Pradesh Gypsies, a card that nobody cares about, feels like an action for the sake of taking the action.
To me, it feels like, look at me, I'm being so woke, give me your money.
Yes.
And that makes me cringe. But I then had a subsequent reaction.
The third reaction.
The third facet to this diamond of an issue. For me, it's actually a good thing because people with power, corporations with power, with a large audience, such as Magic, should be putting these things out, should be setting standards, should be public examples for people. And I think Magic especially, and I'll tell you why. I feel like, how do you agree with me that Magic probably likely has a large, young, white, male player base?
I would definitely agree with you on that. Magic's entire business model was based around the premise that people would get into it, play it for a couple of years, and move on, and so that they would have a renewable, young, predominantly white, predominantly male player base. I feel like that's changing a little lately with the advent of Magic Arena.
Now, would you agree with me that that same demographic is the target of recruitment from the alt-right?
There's an overlap there.
So, if things that young white men like are taking a stand and going, we're standing for these things, I think it is a positive thing to see. Now, of course, there can be a bit of, it's a double-edged sword, because there can be sort of, what's the word, clash. There can be a thing. It certainly seems to have been that way, because I know that some alt-right people have covered this topic in the days since.
To me seems ridiculous. Who would go to bat for Pradesh Gypsies? It's a bad card.
my darling. Now, you haven't watched the video, but I have.
No interest in watching
You have no
it.
interest in it, but I have watched the video of a certain individual getting very, very upset. Not upset about Pradesh Gypsies. I mean, I will say this. He is a British gentleman, and he knows that the word gypsies is a slur, because it is in that country. Here in New Zealand, we don't use that word a lot because we don't really have itinerant traveller people. We just don't see them here in New Zealand. But I know that they are a presence in the UK. I know that he knows that gypsies is a slur. I know he knows, and he's just, he's dog whistling. But he got very upset because he says, I love being racist against goblins.
Well, I think the difference there is that you're unlikely to meet a goblin in real life.
Yeah.
And also that Magic probably has better portrayal. Actually, yes, Magic does have better characterization and representation of goblin lives than it does of traveller lives.
That is a very good point. That is a very, very good point. I mean, it's a difficult thing in any fantasy setting when you try and use real-world ethnicities as stereotypes or bases for your fantasy races. We're going to get into that more. That is an important thing.
This is embarrassed laughter you're hearing here.
Oh, look, like I said, we're children of the 90s, well, 80s, 90s. We've got some growing to do, because the fictions that we grew up with were problematic.
I had a...
Oh, are you going to talk about Lone Wolf?
Oh, I am.
Good.
I had a problem when we ran a game of Lone Wolf, the tabletop role-playing game, the excellent one from Cubicle 7, with a friend of ours and her partner, who we later found out was a white supremacist. And then we realised Lone Wolf is about a bunch of white people who are given special magical powers by God so that they are the best people in the world. The special people with the special bloodline who are the only people who can save the world from the forces of hell and their Turkish Middle Eastern allies.
In case you couldn't hear it, I just facepalmed. Oof.
And I don't think that JoDiva was a racist.
No.
And in fact, if you go deeper into his works, there are lots of examples of other traditions and other cultural groups in his world of Magnamund, which are also awesome and are coded Chinese or coded African American or other cultural groups. And I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt that he just came up with what he thought was a cool idea. And the Kai Lords are a cool idea. They're like medieval Jedi Knights. And everyone likes Jedi, right?
Oh, Star Wars is full of racial stereotypes.
Let's save that for another day.
Let's save that one, yeah. Could take all night.
But the 80s was a less woke time.
Oh, yeah.
And I know another thing that Lone Wolf had problems with was the implication that there were no women in the Kai Lords as well, which is something that towards the end of his life, JoDiva strove to include female representation extensively.
I mean, can I just reiterate, just in case anyone's having an adverse reaction to what we're talking about, right? Let's just reiterate why these things are important. Representation changes lives. It changes lives for people who then find themselves represented in the fiction. For example, if you're black and female and you finally see a character in a fiction that is black and female, you feel a little bit more represented, right? But the other side of it is, if you're a white boy reading a thing and suddenly there's a black female character, you finally have a chance to sort of connect with someone who is different from you.
One of the great things about stories is that it lets us imagine that we are not who we are, that we can go to a different time, a different place, be a different person, see the world through a different set of eyes. And that's a wonderful way to increase our understanding and our tolerance. And so the sorts of stories that we tell about people influences the way that we think about people.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we're just reading stories about people who are just like us, then it increases the risk of becoming xenophobic.
And I'm going to use comic books as an example here.
Oh, go on.
A lot of the early black characters that you see in comic books are characters like Luke Cage, the gritty hero for hire on the mean streets of New York, or the Falcon, who came from a life of crime and then grew from there.
I didn't know
he was
that.
originally a petty criminal.
Wow.
Because
I'm glad they left that out of the MCU.
stories,
yeah.
Right? It's a certain type of story. But now you get characters like... I haven't read anything with Riri Williams,
No.
Ironheart, but I understand that she is a black university student who is smart enough to be able to reverse engineer a suit of Iron Man armor and build her own suit. And that gives a whole new paradigm for black experiences. Or, in my opinion, the best black character in comics at the moment is Miles Morales.
I love Miles. He's great.
He's a wonderful character, whose story is he can be Spider-Man.
Hype for the next Spider-Man PlayStation game. Ooh.
Ooh.
Super hype.
And it doesn't mean that Peter Parker doesn't exist anymore.
No.
In fact, they've been very careful to keep both Spider-Men.
Yeah, totally.
But as Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse showed so wonderfully, what a wonderful movie. Anyone can be Spider-Man. Everyone can be Spider-Man. And that just gives a different framing narrative. You don't have to be the Falcon or Luke Cage, whose stories are inextricably linked with crime, blaxploitation,